Okay, all right, we are now live. So, hello everybody. If there's one or two of you out there, please drop a comment in the comments just so we can see whether you can hear and see us. We've got Ash Routen, who's done just a tiny bit. I must admit, I don't actually know very much about you, Ash, but I do believe you're quite reasonably famous and quite well known and has done a little bit in the Arctic and such like. So we'll come to that in a minute. And obviously, Dan, I know you from WildCamping.LifeUK on Instagram. So when this is finished, make sure you maybe just send me a link and I can put that in the description so people can find you. So if we start with Ash, just a brief introduction as to who you are, what you've done, etc., etc.
Well, evening, Tony, and hi, everyone. My name's Ash Routen, and I'm an outdoor adventure writer based here in the Midlands of the UK. I spend quite a lot of my time writing about other people's adventures, be that in the Himalaya on the 8,000-metre peaks, or perhaps at the poles, trekking to the North Pole, or in the Canadian High Arctic. So I spend a lot of time writing about others. And when I can wangle the time off of the day job, I like to go Arctic trekking, primarily winter, but I did my first summer trip in Greenland a couple of months ago. So yeah, that's a bit of an overview.
Okay, so have you done the South Pole as well, or mainly just the North?
No, in fact, I've done neither poles. They are exorbitantly expensive. If you were going to do a full distance North Pole trek now from the very tip of Canada to the North Pole, it would cost you in the hundreds of thousands of pounds.
Oh, right. Okay.
And South Pole, again, a full length, which is about 1,000 kilometers, it would cost you around $70,000.
Oh, wow.
So,
oh, wow.
You either have to be a kind of a trustafarian, as I would call it, and be from money, or you need to be very good at fundraising through the corporate world.
Oh, right. Okay. So you couldn't just go down there and just start walking off like you can do sort of here or something. It's a bit more complicated than that.
Yeah, and because Antarctica is governed by a unilateral kind of inter-country treaty, the Antarctic Treaty, you have to meet quite a lot of criteria to be able to be considered, such as having big rescue and insurance bonds and ensuring you'll meet environmental regulations and so on. So it's quite complex. It takes anywhere between 2 to 5 years to plan, and you need to be good at fundraising, and I don't want to spend my spare time doing that.
And you've had things published in National Geographic, is that correct?
Yeah, I've written for a range of magazines, places in New Zealand and UK, US, and Nat Geo UK as well.
Well, thank you very much for coming on my channel. That's quite a, very nice. Thank you very much.
Oh no, absolute pleasure. Great to chat.
And Dan, just introduce yourself.
Hi Tony, thanks for inviting me on with Ash. So yeah, I'm Dan. I come from a wild camping background. The whole Arctic thing is something new to me. I had a little taste of it last winter in Sweden, but I just wanted to expand kind of like my winter skills really. And I've been talking to Ash for I think a couple of years now. Ash, we've been on social media, and I've just out the blue said to Ash, if you've got anything planned or anything like that, just keep me in mind.
Right.
Which I'm gladly he did, and he presented, well, not presented, but told me about this this trip we're going on, the crossing Norway's plateau, Finnmarksvidda, and so yeah, absolutely, I was really happy to come on board.
Right.
So I haven't got the kind of like extensive knowledge that Ash has got, but I'm, this is a huge learning curve for me, so I'm hoping I won't freeze to death when I'm out there. But I know the basics.
I think you're in safe hands anyway.
yeah, absolutely. So, and it's also sorry Tony. It's interesting to say, Ash has also crossed Lake Baikal, which is no mean feat. the largest lake in the world by volume. And so, yeah, he's got a lot of
frozen. I assume it was frozen at the time. You crossed it.
Yeah. So he's got a lot of experience.
Right. So how far was that, Ash?
It was about 19 and a half days and 640 k. It wasn't quite the full distance, but he's sort of 95% of it.
Right.
I know Dan and I first started talking about it when Dan was planning his own trip, and if Russia ever opens up again, then he'll get the chance to do that.
Right.
Definitely.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the next thing is, so we've done the who, so we're going to keep it fairly condensed then. Obviously, if you want to say anything, or if there are any questions, pop them in there, because this is kind of new to me, sort of, extra people here, so we'll kind of help each other. So where are you planning on going? I mean, obviously, I know it's in the description, but let's assume that no one's read that, because who reads the instructions or anything? So where are you planning on going, and why are you planning on going there specifically?
Do you want to lead this, Ash?
And let Ash start that one then. Yes,
I can start. So about 400 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle, just below the 70th degree of latitude. So if you're looking at a map, not quite the very tip of Norway where North Cape is, go a sort of a quarter of the way down. We're flying into a small community called Alta on the west coast of Norway. And we're getting a short taxi ride just out of Alta to cross something called the Finnmark or Finnmarksvidda plateau, which is a large.
Is that the map there? Can you see that map at all?
Yeah, I can see that well, Tony. And it's a large open mountain plateau, which in winter is a good introduction to Arctic or polar style travel. So the conditions there, both in temperature, and the type of bleak, open, snowy tundra, in some way resemble what you might find on a larger polar expedition, albeit it's compressed into a much smaller area. So it's a good introduction to that kind of winter Arctic trekking. And so we're going from the west coast of Norway right to the border of Finland, which at that latitude isn't a huge distance. It's depending on variations, it's between 100 and 120 kilometers. And we'll end in a place called Karasjok, which is where the Sami government is located. So it's a Sami community. So interesting historically, culturally, and the route that we're going to be trekking on, I say trekking, skiing will be cross-country skis with a sled, is an old postal route. So historically, hundreds of years ago, in summer at least, that was on horseback postal delivery between Finland and that side of Norway. So yeah, interesting place geographically, physical landscape, and a bit of culture and history and so on as well.
Right. Okay. All right. And how long was it? 7 days, I think you said, isn't it? Is that right? About 7 days to do? That was the plan.
Well, I think
I'll let Dan come in here. So was it about 7 days? You said, but you were taking a bit of extra food to cover you.
Yeah, well, it's we said between 6 and 7 days, but we've planned for some spare days. We spoke about if the weather changes or we get harped by high winds or anything like that, we have got them extra days in place, kind of like a fail safe. But I think, between about 6 and 7 days, finishing early on the 7th day.
Right. Okay.
But like anywhere, you can't predict the weather. We've been looking at the weather very closely, and it has been quite settled in regards to wind. The temperatures have dropped on a couple of occasions, -40. I think it's starting to settle around about the -20, -30 mark. So yeah, we've around about 7 days, but we've scheduled some spare days, if you will, just in case.
Right. Okay. And Ash, how I assume you will both travel together. You will both go there together. and just do the whole from here? So do the whole thing together?
I mean, you have to be pragmatic with these types of tricks. Logistics is the hardest part. Often when you get there, you relax. The actual travelling, out on the ice is the straightforward part. So it's a flight from Heathrow to Oz. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of stress, all of that. So it's a flight from Heathrow to Oslo, and there from Oslo to Alta, smaller plane up to above the Arctic Circle. So relatively straightforward, and that's the thing. In Scandinavia, you have many locations across Norway, Sweden, and Finnmark that are accessible by plane within a couple of hours. In some cases, you might need onward transport, which is where it starts to get a bit trickier and certainly more expensive.
Right.
But we do have on our doorstep from the UK the ability to reach a remote Arctic wilderness environment. And you don't have to be much more than a good outdoorsman, experienced hiker and wild camper, and then just have that little step up to transfer it.
Right. Okay. When you get there, so you land on the second flight, do you go to a hotel, or what happens when you actually land there? You obviously don't land next to Father Christmas land, as it were, using a city. It's my stupid sense. But I mean, obviously you have to start from somewhere. So I'm assuming you don't flag a taxi down or something, or do you flag a taxi down? How do you get to the actual bit where you sort of, put your skis on and your harness and you start walking? So how do you get to that bit, or do you step out of a hotel and start? How does that bit start? And I'll let Ash answer that one, and then I'll come to you down in a minute.
Oh, right, okay.
So Alta itself is a relatively civilized place. It's a fairly small town, and it has all the modern amenities like we would have in the UK, and some great outdoor shops. So we'll be staying on a campsite in a small chalet for the day before we go out on the ice. So we can make sure that all our kit arrives safely. We can pick up some of the things that we won't be able to fly with, such as lighters and white gas for our stoves. We'll test out our skis and our pulk and rope configurations and make sure all the weight is nicely distributed in the pulk and it's packed well. And by pulk, sorry, I mean sled. That's the kind of term that people tend to use, pulk or pulka in Scandinavia, for the small sledge that would be kit in it. And then simply, actually, you weren't far away. It's a taxi. It's a taxi about 30 minutes out of Alta onto through a valley. And then we will try and locate the head of the trail. In most of these locations, there aren't trails, but with snow machines being pretty popular up there are winter routes that the snow machines take between communities. So we'll be trying to get onto one of those and follow that for some of the way.
Oh, hang on, I put myself up. Hang on a minute.
Okay,
there. So that's something like you're carrying there, is it? So you're taking something like that then. So Dan, when you this is the one that you bought, isn't it? So
yeah,
will you pack? Do you pack everything in the pulk, and then you pack the pulk in a bag, and you pack everything that you're taking with the pulk in the bag? Is that right? And then that flies just like with you, just as regular luggage. Is that right?
Yeah, so my last trip to the Arctic, which was in Sweden last March, the way I did it was just packed my pulk as normal. If I was going on a trip, so I just packed it with all my gear and then cinched it down with bungees and then just shrink wrapped it. Because we're flying with SAS Airlines, Scandinavian Airlines, so they're well equipped and they're used to these sort of bags being loaded, on a daily basis with where the location is. So it's not as hard as what you think, and it's not as complicated as what you think. Transporting a pulk or skis, it's kind of like a everyday thing. This type of airline, so it's not as confusing as well. Because before I went to the Arctic last year, I was thinking the same. How hard is it going to be to transport all this camping gear? But it is relatively quite straightforward, as long as you're within the weight limit, and as long as you're not, like Ash mentioned, carrying fuel, lighters, that sort of thing, just like you would in any other country.
Right. Okay.
So it's as simple as that, really. You can buy pulk bags, so a bag that you can put your pulk in, but I just tend to just cinch the bag down with a bit of shrink wrap, and that seems to do the job.
All right. Okay. So you'll be taking yours then with the bag on the pulk, and then just shrink wrap the whole lot together.
Yeah. So with the pulk I'm using, the pulk bag, it's attached to the actual pulk with straps. Cinch that down, and then I just run a few bungees around that just to secure it even more, and then I'll just use shrink wrap or something like that just to secure it in place.
Right. Okay. And you carry your skis with you. So you take the skis with you as well. So you'd have one big package of pulk, which you kind of carry under your arm or something, and then you're carrying the skis as well. And then do you carry other bags with you as well?
Yeah. So the skis will be in a set. I think me and Ash are putting the skis in one bag, one long bag. Obviously, that saves on money and space. But yeah, just a small holdall to take on the plane consists of maybe a wash kit. Well, not necessarily a wash kit, but maybe a quick change of clothes to suit the type of trip we're doing. A book, an MP3 player, things like that, just to take on the plane itself.
Okay. And Ash, what were you when you do this? Okay, so do you normally do things yourself solo, or do you normally take people or go with people?
It's been a mixture, really, both solo and with a good friend Phil. The very first trip I did, in fact, was the exact same route Dan and I are planning, with a guide from Nottingham, Mike Thornywell, and previously I hiked, scrambled, rock climbed, kayaked, and so on, and had wild camping experience like Dan, but not as much as Dan. I knew I wanted to do a bit more, and actually it wasn't too much of a transition from general outdoor skills to being able to operate in the cold environment. And on that very first trip, I met a guy called Phil, who was a plumber in Nottingham. We got on really well. And so I've done most of my trips with Phil. We've been to, we crossed Lake Baikal, which was 20 days. We've been to Sarek National Park in Sweden 2 years ago. For 10 days, we walked from the ice cap in Greenland to the coast over 10 days this summer. What else have we done? Other stuff I can't remember. I like the mixture of both solo and going with a teammate. Sometimes it can be a little bit lonely, especially if it's sort of a 5 to 10 day journey. But anyone that goes on, any of your listeners that go on a walk or multi-day hike by themselves appreciate a bit of time by themselves, and perhaps that challenge of self-reliance, which is important. But I quite like the shared experience, and particularly, just having that little safety net of another traveller with you is quite helpful. Because it is can be a difficult environment to operate in.
Right. Okay. And Dan, when you did your trip last year, so this might be more. Ash might know more about this because he's done it more, but I'll direct this to you then. When you did your trip last year, how long were you in Sweden? It was Sweden, wasn't it? How long were you there for? Yeah, so basically, I wanted on my bucket list was to wild camp in the Arctic Circle. I've been wanting to do it for years. So the trip was based on that rather than what me and Ash are doing this time round, from getting from point A to B. This trip was basically just spend a couple of nights in the Arctic Circle. So I went with my dad. On his bucket list was the Northern Lights, to see the Northern Lights. So the whole trip was around about 7 days, and we did a couple of nights wild camping in between those days. So I had the conditions what I wanted to experience, like the cold, and because it's a different type of cold. Now I've looking back when I went to Mongolia, we saw temperatures around about -30, but it's because it's such a dry cold,
it sounds a lot worse than what it is. So we had a group of Mongolians come over to visit the London embassy, and I think the day they visited, it was like a wet 2-degree day, and they absolutely hated it. They were freezing cold. So that's what struck me first off in Sweden, was how dry the temperature was, because obviously there's not a lot of moisture in the air. I'm slightly going off a little bit, but yeah. So that trip was just basically like a wild camping trip, so to speak. So I wanted to expand on that and do something bigger. And I'm used to long distance hiking in the UK. I've done many long distance trails, so I just wanted to expand that skill set, and that's why I contacted Ash to let me know if he's got anything in the pipeline. So yeah, I just wanted to expand on that
quite
trip, really.
Then, isn't it? From wild camping and then heading in, into that. Have you done very much preparation for it here?
I have. I've got a little bit of OCD when it comes to preparation in gear choices and things like that. Obviously, I've relied heavily on Ash's input regarding things. Like I know the basics. I know what type of sleeping bag and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I have relied on Ash quite a lot, just for his input, which is really valuable. And I think I'm about there. I've had my stove come the other day. That's the last bit I was waiting for. So I think I'm set. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I've got a question for Ash then, because obviously you've done a lot there. How do you navigate down there? Because I'm kind of like sort of thinking, when I navigate here, I pick up my phone and I can touch my phone with my fingers, or I can get the map and I can use my hands and my fingers. Obviously, when you're at -20, -30, quite clearly you can't do that because your fingers will freeze in 30 seconds or a minute or something. So how on earth do you navigate down there? Because I'm constantly needing, the reassurance of looking at the map or looking at my phone. So obviously with experience, you don't need to do that. But how do you navigate down there without getting lost?
Yeah, and I suppose different to a lot of mountain environments in the UK, there are less features within your horizon to be able to, for example, take bearings from and to relay the landscape to the map. So for me, it's a lot of I rely primarily on paper map and compass and taking bearings and walking on those. And in fact, some people have a compass tray. And if they're down in Antarctica where there are no features, they know they need to walk on an 80-degree bearing for 12 hours that day. They'll have their compass tray, and they'll just be skiing or snowshoeing, and trying to stick to that bearing. So a lot of it for me is paper map and basic bearing work, and then checking where I am with our GPS device and combined satellite tracker. So
and how do you operate that? Do you have to have thick gloves when you're doing it? Can you take your gloves off for a few seconds, or is that just literally a no when you're down there?
I mean, it all depends on your wind speed and temperature. So you can ski quite happily at -15 with no gloves on at all, because part of the where your extremities are heated is by having your core temperature at a good temperature, pumping warm blood around the body. So if you're moving, there's low wind speeds, even the air temperature could be -15, and you can actually be comfortable without any gloves on, depending on how hot and cold you run.
Right. Okay.
If it drops, if it's a lot lower, let's say it was something like -35 with a bit of wind, you absolutely would not want to be removing gloves, and you might well have more than one layer of gloves on. And so they're going to be bulky and hard to operate. So part of it is practice at home with gloves on, practice with pointy objects like the end of your ski poles to manipulate the buttons. In some cases, if it's a phone or a touchscreen GPS, you might have one of those, $1.99 from Amazon stylus pens that you can get. So there are ways around it.
Okay. All right. Lovely. Let's just have a look over in the comments over here. Just see whether there's a few comments, not too many. Let's just see I could do a book. Any chance? Yeah. So Grizzly Gaz says there's no such thing as a South Pole. The Earth is flat. So Grizzly Gaz says a question for Dan. I can actually highlight it, I think. There we go. Will Dan be taking his nature hike tent? so obviously, are you taking a nature hike tent? And what tent will you be taking?
Well, it was between the nature hike tent or the Hilleberg Chiron 4GT, and we had extensive conversations, didn't we, Ash, about these two tents. I wanted to take the nature hike, but Ash insisted on the Hilleberg, so we're taking the Hilleberg instead.
You've gone with that one, have you?
Yeah.
Wouldn't be so bad.
Colonel Blimp down here says he's gonna go and take his camper van with him. Not sure quite how far you get with a camper van down there. But it's certainly so. How far would you be able? Could you take a vehicle there? Because I don't know whether any of you are like Top Gear fans or anything like that. But obviously, in Top Gear, donkeys years ago, I don't know if it was the North or the South Pole, but two of them drove to the pole, and then I think Richard Hammond took the dogs or something. So how far could you take vehicles in? You know, a proper vehicle, not a camper van, obviously.
So the shorter answer. So you go on, Dan, actually.
Oh, sorry. Well, when we got to Sweden last year, we actually not met up with a group. We saw a convoy of Land Rovers, and they'd driven from Poland all the way to where we were, all self-sufficient, and they were going further north. We stayed in Kiruna, so they were traveling further north, which was so yeah, judging by that, it's absolutely capable. I'd say
you could do to a degree. Let's have a look. Let's see. So if you've got any questions, put them there, because we've got about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we're going to have to let this. So hi, saying hi from Riga, Latvia. Extreme weather here, bloody cold, and tons of snow. -7 West Yorkshire. So Grizzy says, is -7 Arctic conditions? so how far away is minus? So Ashley, how far away is -7 to Arctic conditions? So how much of a difference, you know? So if we go outside here and it's like -4, -5, how much of a shock is it from -7 to -50, -20, -30? Is that quite a shock?
No, I mean, I've just been reading earlier that the spine race, which is, you know, many of you all will know at the moment, the winter spine race is on. It's been about -15 in the UK. So some of the temperatures that we might see between sort of -5 and -20, we get in the UK anyway. It's a different type, like Dan said very well earlier. It's a wet cold here rather than a dry cold, so it doesn't always quite feel as comparable. I think it's really, you start to notice it when you get to the late -20s into the -30s, certainly face and extremities and so on. And then below that is really important, particularly with your equipment, because things like plastics in very deep cold operate in a very different way. And some polar travelers would kind of liken it to like operating in space. You have to be very careful and accurate with all of your movements, because if plastic-based equipment, you shatter a binding on a ski and you don't have replacement, or you're a bit rough with other bits of equipment in the tent or so on, and you don't have spare. So you do have to be careful. And the same with even things like teeth when you're eating. Obviously, a lot of the stuff is going to be frozen, and you have to kind of chew it and warm it a little bit in your feet, not in your mouth a little bit. So yeah, it's a different world when it starts getting into the high -30s and so on.
Okay. So what's the coldest that you've been in, Ash?
Air temperature in the low mid -30s. I don't know, with added wind chill on there.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And Dan, what was the lowest that you had when you were in Sweden? What was the temperatures that went down to with that?
Well, the lowest air temperature I've experienced has been around about -25.
Right.
And then the coldest with wind chill was in Mongolia on Lake Kovsgol, where I think with the wind chill dropped to about -37.
Right.
So it's quite a weird one for me. Like a -20 doesn't really feel as different to a -30, if that makes sense. It's equally very cold. But as soon as it starts dropping, especially with the wind chill, the lower, the lower end of the -40s, 37, it's really cold. And like Ash say, when you're on a lake and it's really exposed, I think your clothing and your layering system really needs to be on the ball. If you travel, if you're too hot, that could cause a problem, and obviously if you're too cold, that can cause a problem as well. So I think what I've taken from them temperatures is the clothing is vitally important. But yeah, like a -15 over in Sweden, a -2, a wet -2 in Snowdonia feels a lot colder.
Right.
It's quite hard to explain.
Yeah, I understand. And then another question here is from Cheryl. Do you encounter many women taking on these challenges? Ash, that's probably the one for Ash.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And unfortunately, I guess historically, it's been men that have been recognised and written about their polar travels. But
Hang on, have we lost Ash?
This kind of travel isn't purely physical. I might have just dropped out there. Yeah, in part,
I think
this kind of travel.
Yeah,
I'll just repeat it and say the simple answer is yes. Women are as capable, if not more capable, than men, and partly because this kind of travel isn't purely physical; it's mental, and it's about kit admin, keeping check of your fingers and toes, keeping a good routine. That's very important for progress and making sure that you're safe and you're not getting any cold injuries. And we can take Preet Chandy, who has just set the female record to the South Pole recently, has done some big journeys in Antarctica. A lady I know in Nottinghamshire, Fiona Thorneywill, held the speed record from the coast or the inner coastline of Antarctica to the South Pole from 2000.
Ash has dropped out again. Having fun with Ash today.
Dropped out again. So I think I was rambling on just saying, that some women have held the speed records to the South Pole, both the male and female speed record. And more women are doing this. It is opening up, and physiology is certainly not a barrier. The girls are just as good, if not better, than the boys. Right.
Yeah, because I think the impression I get is a lot of it is up here, isn't it? As much as anything else with the challenge of it. So one question here for me: am I going to be doing anything like this? Yeah. Well, I'm heading up to Scotland with Chris soon, hopefully. So I might actually get some snow. I was down in the Peak District, up in the Peak District, I should say. I thought everybody goes out when it's snowy. So I thought, okay, I'll go north where there's going to be some snow. And when I got there, it was about +1 degree. So I thought, well, I'll try and go a bit further north. So hopefully going up with Chris. And if you saw the live stream that I did with Antonio last week, and if you didn't, check that out. Hopefully next year, maybe April time, I might try and get to Sweden and do something with him in Sweden on some skis, and we'll just kind of see. We'll take it steady because obviously I'm the laziest camper in the world, but we'll kind of see how it goes. But yes, it's certainly something that I'm interested in trying to do, some cold weather camping. And Dan has mentioned about maybe doing something with him, maybe at some point in the future. So I can probably find someone that will do something with me. Another question here. We've got about 5 minutes left, something like that. Okay. So question 4. So I'll put this one to Dan. What sleep systems will you be using?
So this has probably been my biggest area I've researched going into this trip. I'll be using a foam insulated mat with a inflatable mat on top, and then I've got a sleeping bag rated down to -30. Now I've taken into account the temperatures leading up to the trip. If it was a 30+ day expedition, I'd probably go with a vapor barrier liner as well. But because it's a short trip and I've had conversations with Ash about this, I might be able to get away with, just the sleeping bag. So I'm going to take. I'm going to watch out for the temperatures leading up to the trip, whether to take a synthetic over bag with me, and that just protects the down bag from freezing. But as it stands, it's just a foam mat, an inflatable mat, and we're going with the Thermarest Polar Ranger sleeping bag. Right. And then to hold it all in place in the pulk, I've got an oversized bivy bag. So when we break for camp, it's just a case of it's just pulling the sleeping bag out straight into the tent. But the bivy bag is there, just in case as well.
Right, so that's like an emergency. Okay, I'll put another question to Ashley. Okay, so this one here. So what clothing will you be using during the hike? And do you have to move slow as not to sweat?
That's a really perceptual comment there, actually, because moisture is the enemy of the Arctic traveller. You'll get colder much quicker if you're sweating and it freezes on your clothing and draws the heat away from your body. So not a great deal, actually, because you generate heat through movement. Remember, you're pulling a pulk with 35, 40 kilograms in. So I'll have a simple base layer. You could just have base layers from Aldi. They don't have to be anything fancy as long as they whip the moisture away from your body and keep you a little bit warm. So I'll have base layers, and then I'll just have a simple 3-layer Gore-Tex hard shell jacket. Nothing fancy, but the key thing is lots of ventilation, access. So pit zips is really important. And then a pair of salopettes, which have full-length zips on the side. So again, you can vent and you can drop your trousers easily to do your toilet business.
Right.
And so it's basically hard shell top and salopettes.
Well, how many layers will you have under the? Sorry, how many?
Just two in general. Just the base layer and the outer layer, and I could probably ski happily depending on the weight of the pulk and how fast I'm moving, sort of into -20s. If there is a lot of wind, I might add in a mid layer, such as a light fleece, something like a Polartec 100. And then it's only around camp that you get into the big puffy clothing that people tend to associate with this kind of
because I'm kind of like thinking Michelin Man or something like that, but it's not so much. Okay.
Yeah, and then I mean all those where you see people skiing with those on, that's rubbish. That's not realistic.
Right. Okay. No, that's it. So, Dan and Ash, would you take Tony on one of these?
Cheers, Ash. Well, I regard you, Tony, as the godfather of wild camping. So, so in all seriousness, we've been talking for many months about meeting up for a wild camp, especially in the winter. So, yeah, of course. I think I love your. Well, I've said it previously. I love your YouTube channel. Very honest and funny at the same time. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Lovely, thanks. Well, something we can look to in the future. We can build up to that. Okay, we've got a couple of minutes. How many, Ash, this is probably for you. How many calories will you need daily? Is Ash still there? He's probably disappeared for the moment. So if Ash has gone, Dan, you know how many? We're having fun. I think. Are you there? Are you there, Ash? I think he has more. He has more luck in the Arctic than he does. Have you got back, Ash? You're back. How many calories would you need daily?
Oh, the sound's gone.
He's gone again. All right, so Dan,
Just, um,
we'll leave you go in a minute. So
I think we're going to shoot for around about 4,000 calories. Well, between 4,000 and 5,000 calories. 3,000 calories of that will probably be made up of dehydrated meals, and then we'll just top that up with snacks. So when we do stop, we don't have to crank up the stove every time. We can just, like salami, cheeses, things like that, chocolate. So around about 4,000 calories, I think, is the sweet spot.
okay, all right. If there are any other questions, because we did say about 40 minutes, and I need to let these two gentlemen go on. So if you've got any other questions or anything like that, just pop them in there, really quickly now. Otherwise, I will just thank you both for coming on here, and joining me. I've only got teeny weeny channel, so it's really nice that you took the time out to to join me on here. And as I mentioned to Dan, if you want to come back on here again when you get back and then talk about your trip or something like that, it's up to you. I'm not going to pressure you, but it would be nice, to have the discussion with you. And if this hasn't put you off too much and you've got a little bit more time, then that would be great, because you can see 40 minutes, it just flies by so quickly. And as we're talking, I'm thinking of other questions as well. And I've already asked Dan a million questions just everything. So
well,
I think we've probably finished with the questions in the comments there. So we won't do any more comments because I know you both need to go. So Dan, would you like to do a parting few words before we let you go?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for inviting us along.
Pleasure, thank you.
Yeah, really appreciate it. I'll be more than happy to, after the trip, if I haven't frozen to death, come back and let you know how we've gone. But I've had hundreds of messages through my Instagram regarding the trip. So if anyone's watching who does follow me on Instagram, thank you for that. I do appreciate the questions. And I've also had a lot of people contact me with tips on gear choices, which I really appreciate as well, because this is a learning curve for me as well. So thank you to everyone who's kind of like been following the lead up to this trip, so to speak. So yeah, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And Ash, would you like to have a few parting words?
Yeah, just thank you, Tony, for the opportunity to share some of the insights around dark travel. It's there for the everyday person, just like Dan and I, to access. So if you're interested, do some research, get in touch, and you can do it. It's accessible to everyone, apart from obviously money is needed.
Yeah, no, that's lovely. Well, thank you very much, both. So what I'll do is I'll turn the stream off, and then you'll still be there, so we can talk just for a few seconds. So I will just turn the stream, and thank you, everyone, very much for joining. Like, subscribe, share, the usual thing, and we'll see you in the next video and the next live stream when these two come back as two icicles or something like that. I'll turn the stream off now. Thanks very much. So it's just